Thank you. So before we start, perhaps I should just mention the fact that there is a bit of a discrepancy between what's written in the abstract and especially regarding my part, because by the time we submitted the abstract for this conference, the Sangue Giusto hadn't come out yet. It's quite a recent release, dated October 2017, and so when I read it, I thought it was a very important book for reasons that I'm hoping to briefly touch on. It's very intense, it's also very thick, and there are many, many aspects that one could analyze and are worthy of analysis, but it's really beyond the scope of a 20 minutes paper. So I'm going to take a very specific approach, and because our interest is in ambivalence, a shared perspective that we have, both Mark and I'm going to focus on that specific aspect, but I'm happy to discuss more about the novel, perhaps in the question time. So we start with ambivalence. The dictionary defines ambivalence as a term indicating the simultaneous existence of two opposed and conflicting attitudes or emotions. This very broad concept has been profitably utilized and theorized in a variety of disciplines and academic discourses, including the social sciences, psychoanalysis, and literary criticism. Given our areas of academic expertise, which is film and literary studies, we are going to discuss and examine two specific texts, a filmic and a literary one, by focusing on the concept of ambivalence. The film is Bernardo Bertolucci's Besieged from 1999, and the literary text is Francesca Melandri's latest novel, Sangue Giusto, Right Blood, published by Rizzoli in October 2017, so a very recent work. We have chosen to focus on ambivalence as we think this framework is able to recast the notion of mobility so as to better account for the experiences of modern-day refugees and the way we relate to the status of human beings in motion, which is a motion between two geopolitical spaces, in our specific case, two continents, Europe and Africa, which are still entrenched in deeply rooted asymmetrical power relations. Before delving into a discussion of ambivalence in a post-colonial context, which is my specific part of the paper, and then moving to an analysis of selected aspects of this novel, Sangue Giusto, I'd like to spend a few words on the structure of my part of the presentation. This is the overall structure. I will first provide a short overview of the novel's major plotline, and as I said, there are many, many plot lines that one could explore in this novel, but we don't have the time to do that. The short introduction will be followed by a few notes which will, I hope, illustrate the significance of this very recent literary work. This consideration will then allow me to explain why today I have decided to explore selected aspects of Sangue Giusto through a post-colonial framework supported by references to the seminal work The Location of Culture by Homi Bhabha from 1994. So after my discussion of Sangue Giusto, Marco will then take over to analyze Bertolucci's film Besieged, and we will then present a bit of a discussion which we hope we can share with you with questions from the floor. Now, Francesca Melandri's Sangue Giusto breaks the traditional dichotomy of colonizer and colonized in multiple ways. Sangue Giusto's opening plotline follows the vicissitudes of an Italian woman in her 40s, Ilaria Profeti, who is suddenly confronted by her father Attilio's fascist past and the long-term consequences of the ideological and opportunistic choices he made in his youth. In the novel, colonization and migration intertwine through the story of various generations of the Profeti family. In 2010, Attilio Profeti is 92 and senile. He will die 2 years later. On a late August afternoon, Attilio's youngest descendant, Shimeta Yetmengeta Attila Profeti, from Ethiopia, is waiting for Ilaria in front of her apartment door, on the staircase of a 6th-floor apartment building in the Roman suburb of Esquilino, where Ilaria lives. He declares to Ilaria, in almost perfect Italian, that he is Attilio Profeti's grandchild, and so she must be her great-aunt. Ilaria is not aware of his existence. No one in her immediate family is aware of his existence. Not her mother, Morella, and her two brothers, Federico and Emilio, nor her stepmother, Anita, who's her father's second wife, and her stepbrother, Attilio Profeti Jr., the first, we now find out, of Attilio's secret son, to whom Ilaria is now very close and who lives in the apartment opposite hers. On the Rai Cultura's webpage dedicated to this book, this work is introduced as a novel that, and I'm quoting here, and you have the quote here, perfectly intertwines the narration of a present in which Ilaria is forced to deal with her father's secret life and to dig into his past, with the narration of Attilio Profeti's life story. His story leads her through the history of the Italian violent occupation of Ethiopia during the fascist years, the quick and sudden conversions of the immediate post-war period, then on to the Tangentopoli scandal and the years of the Berlusconi political leadership, up until Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's visit to Rome in 2010. This is also the story of Shimeta's journey, this young African man who leaves Ethiopia and traveling through the Libyan desert, Libya's jails, the Mediterranean Sea, the famous crossing, and the Italian detention centers, the Centri di Identificazione ed Espulsione, lands on Ilaria's doorstep. It is a very dense novel written in a dry and powerful language. Despite the dramatic events narrated in these pages, the readers cannot, and this is an important point, the readers cannot come to hate any of the characters, not even Attilio Profeti. The author's narrative balance and ability suspends judgment in favor of a deep exploration of every shade of these ever so common characters, who in their normal and multifaceted mediocrity resemble us much more than what we might be prepared to admit. Now, on the same webpage, there is also a short footage of the author talking about her novel, and it is worth listening to what Melandri has to say about it. With Attilio Profeti, I wanted to portray the typical Italian phenomenon of people who, in their youth, completely supported fascism. A fascism that during the years of the occupation of Ethiopia could count on the full consensus of the Italian population. I didn't want to tell the story of the cruelest of butchers, the torturers from Salon, and neither the story of heroes, the partisans. I wanted to portray that vast and predominant segment of the population who was fascist, even convinced fascist, who then, oops, on the 25th of April, or better on the 26th of April, were no longer fascist. We saw this almost light-hearted, slippery way of shunning historical responsibility and accountability which lacked even later. This is precisely who Attilio Profeti is. In another interview with Massimo Maugeri for the radio program Letteratitudine in October 2017, Melandri described the book as a novel dealing with colonialisms of two sorts. This novel is about colonialism, the real colonialism of the 30s, of the Italians in Abyssinia and the occupation of Ethiopia, but also that colonialism that we carry inside us, in our minds. I should say that this is the colonialism I am most interested in, which is the one we live every day, or perhaps I should say again today, in our relationships with the migrants who arrive here, and in our inability to imagine different conditions and modalities. While piecing together these two pieces of the puzzle, I felt an urgency to talk about it in my own way. I am neither an historian nor a journalist. I invent characters, human stories, affective relations, and through these instruments I wanted to narrate the history or story of our country. Now, this brings me to my decision to go back to the notion of post-colonialism. And we all know that the term post-colonialism itself has raised conspicuous debate, not the least due to its controversial suitability to capture the ongoing implications of the colonial period. One of the issues we face is inscribed within the very meaning of this uncomfortable prefix, post. Because it indicates something that comes after, it has been argued that the term itself suggests something which is finished or even dealt with. Another objection to the term rests on the fact that the very term post-colonialism encompasses such broad and multifaceted experiences that it cannot but evoke a troubled sense of homogeneity of the colonial experience, one that unavoidably glosses over the time and spatial specificities of the diverse histories addressed through this term. Finally, more periods are to be seen in a homogeneity constructed on the basis of the univocal point of view through which the colonial experience is observed and narrated, that is the Eurocentric perspective. In other words, this is the gaze of the colonizing nations over what they perceive to be their past as colonizers, a past which we know has deep intricacies into their current present. I share these concerns around the term post-colonial. At the same time, I think that the notion of the post-colonial is still profitable, especially here in the Italian literary discourse, which has suffered from a belated inception into the process of dealing with its own colonial past. In the context of Ethiopia, this reluctance to engage with this crucial piece of the history of Italy in the past century is further complicated by its concurrence with the height of domestic support for fascism. The way I look at the post-colonial today follows the approach outlined by Lombardi, Diop and Romeo, who note and highlight how in the Italian context, the term is beginning to be employed to explore the historical continuum and cultural genealogy that link the colonial past to contemporary Italy. So it's nothing to do with something is being over and dealt with, but it's that sense of continuation into our present and the fact that we haven't really discussed that. In commenting the different developments in post-colonial studies, Robin J.C. Young noted that Italy's, and I'm quoting, position in the front line of the migration flows means that the 21st century has witnessed the transformation of Italian cities, an explosion of interest in issues of migration and multicultural matters, and the production of new writing by African and other migrants to Italy. And this is, I think, quite an interesting sentence. The street migrates into the living room. The idea that the chaos typical of the crowded street down below, the colonial imaginary we know views Africa as the subaltern continent, with this prefix sub, has made its way up into the respectable living quarters of the more highly situated and privileged, is one that permeates Melandri's Rome and indeed the novel's characters and their stories. It is also an image which links to the paradoxical and thought-provoking notion of ambivalence as discussed by Homi Bhabha in his 1994 now seminal work, The Location of Culture. Now, simplifying to the bare minimum a very complex argument, Bhabha says that the colonial paradigm essentially generates the seeds of its own destruction by creating a dimension of hybridity. And he mentioned this by saying the effect of colonial power is seen to be the production of hybridization rather than the noisy command of colonialist authority or the silent repression of native tradition. The hybrid is brought about by the inherently ambivalent nature of the colonial relationship in which two levels, that of complicity and that of resistance, exist in both the colonial subjects and the colonial discourse. Resistance might not surprise us because the relationship between the two parties ensued out of strategies devised to control and dominate. Complicity is a less obvious dimension. We can now more easily see a dimension of complicity in the idealization of the colonial as exotic, as Said taught us in his Orientalism published in 1978. It is also recognizable in what Frantz Fanon addressed in Black Skin, White Mask from 1952. So the act of embracing the dominant culture under the spell of the potential to belong. But this belonging is a form of camouflage in its Lacanian sense, rather than true resemblance and consolidation. A camouflage which ends up placing the colonial subject in a constant position of inadequacy. In this way, though, we witness the entry of formerly excluded subjects into the mainstream discourse. They become authorized versions of otherness, while remaining aesthetically configured as a metonymy of colonial desire. So they're only part objects rather than fully formed subjects. And here again is Bhabha. Resistance is not necessarily an oppositional act of political intention, nor is the simple negation or exclusion of the content of another culture. It is the effect of an ambivalence produced within the rules of recognition of dominating discourses and re-implicate them within the differential relations of colonial power. Now, going back to the novel, the title itself, Sangue Giusto, creates a link with this idea of authorized otherness. Before landing on Ilaria's doorstep, we will learn that Scimeta has gone through several forms of imprisonment. In Italy, he is detained in a CIE, Centri di Identificazione ed Espulsione. The offense he committed is that of clandestinità. The law can be broken simply by being unauthorized to enter. So paraphrasing that quotation from Young, the street cannot but take over the living room. The street is dynamic, this living room is static, dusty, and malfunctioning, yet it is convinced of its own undisputable superior elegance. There is an interesting passage in the book that I haven't put on the slide, in which Scimeta reflects on the very title of the book is Sangue Giusto, so right blood. And this comes from this concept of jus sanguinis. So he's in this centro, in this CIE, and there is another person there with him from Costa d'Avorio, and this is what Melandri writes. Questo ventenne invece è qui in attesa che lo rispediscano in Costa d'Avorio, un paese di cui non ha ricordi e non parla la lingua e dove non conosce nessuno. Perché in Italia non basta avere l'intera famiglia in Italia, frequentare per 13 anni la scuola pubblica italiana e soprattutto tifare la magica come tutti i tuoi amici per essere trattato da cittadino. Conta solo il liquido che ti scorre dentro le vene, come dice la legge, chiamata jus sanguinis. Il giovane etiope una parola l'ha capita ma l'altra no. Cosa vuol dire ius? Giusto, me sa, ma non sono sicuro. Io ho fatto ragioneria, al latino non ce l'avevamo. Il ragazzo resta in silenzio. È proprio in quella legge del giusto sangue che lui invece spera. And this is because we now know that he's the descendant of Ilaria's father. How am I going for time?
You've gone about 15 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, I lost. Okay. From this paradoxical dimension of colonial ambivalence ensues an idea of hybridity as a new locus of culture. The very existence of such hybridity reminds us of the colonial's Janus-based essence. The presence of this newly created third space is quite evident in Melandri's novel. As she comments in the course of the interview for Letteratitudine, it is the ambivalence that sparked her interest and partly instigated that sense of urgency she mentioned in a previous quote. This double-faced aspect of the colonial, the exploitative agent that casts itself as benevolent and nurturing, is foregrounded through the inclusion of an epigraph from Thomas Jefferson, a choice which she then explains in the interview for Letteratitudine. Now, the epigraph, which is in its original English in the book, reads, "The circumstance of superior beauty is thought worthy of attention in the propagation of our horses, dogs, and other domestic animals. Why not in that of man?" In her interview with Mauro Maugeri, Melandri explains how, and I quote, "Thomas Jefferson embodies the ambivalence of what we consider to be the best and the worst of Western culture, the interest and concern for the recognition of universal human rights, while at the same time he possessed slaves." There's a complication in Thomas Jefferson, an ambivalence, a complexity and confusion, which is precisely what I try to narrate in my book within our own Italian context. Now, this epigraph introduces a central theme in the novel, which is embodied in the process of self-discovery of the protagonist, Ilaria. She views herself as an open-minded leftist woman who rejects and despises the materialistic, capitalistic, egocentric and patronizing society she lives in. And these are the years of the Berlusconi, in which Berlusconi was in power, and she has a complete rejection of everything that Berlusconi stands for, but she has a sexual relationship with one of the party's most prominent figures. She thinks of herself as one who refuses to partake in acts of tacit complicity simply in the name of quieto vivere. But in the course of the novel, we witness an increasing sense of self-doubt. The moral high ground from which she looked upon her brothers starts to crumble as she turns that very gaze upon herself. And this is, I think, quite a significant passage in which she reflects upon her own experience. Da oggi Ilaria sa che dopo una vita in cui si è sentita integra e onesta nelle proprie scelte, anche lei ha intascato tangenti. È da più di 20 anni che ci abita dentro, because her apartment was bought by her father, who was the recipient of many tangenti and who was enforcing the system. Se l'ha capito solo adesso è perché fino ad oggi non se l'era mai chiesto. Chi non vuol sapere la verità è complice e a me fa schifo. Non immaginava che un giorno avrebbe riguardato lei stessa, quella frase detta a 16 anni. La piccola Robespierre, così certa del netto confine tra il giusto e lo sbagliato, ancora non sapeva quello che sta capendo ora. Il profumo del privilegio è come la puzza della povertà. Per quanto ti lavi le mani, non andrà mai via. Ilaria herself is thus cast as an ambivalent character. Hers is a form of ambivalence that is unveiled through a process of uncompromising self-analysis that starts from the very first meeting with Shimeta. The pages leading to the first encounter between these two characters are in fact precursors of what is to come. And let me just read. So this is Ilaria is going back home. She's running up the stairs because she lives on the 6th floor, and her neighbor says, "Ciao Ila!" Dalla porta semiaperta sul pianerottolo sporge un profilo impreciso come pietra pomice. Ilaria è certa che l'anziana condomina riconosca ogni passo che sale questi gradini. "Ciao Lina!" risponde con tono gentile ma senza rallentare. "C'è un negro che ti sta aspettando", dice. Ilaria si ferma nel pianerottolo e si volta. "Come hai detto?" "Un africano, tutto nero. Dice che cerca tuo fratello. Non sapevo se dirglielo a che piano state, ma intanto lui era già salito." "Ah, sarà un amico di Attilio. Grazie Lina." "Oh, Ila, mi raccomando, se ti dà fastidio mettiti a urlare. C'è mio nipote qui a cena in caso viene lui a darti una mano." So here we witness this typical kind of suspiciousness towards someone simply because he's black and he doesn't belong and he's never been seen in this building before. Now, the other face of the Janus mask is here represented by Shimeta himself, so this young Ethiopian man. Shimeta is in a way the product of that hybridity discussed by Bava. His command of the Italian language surprises Ilaria, who only finds minor fault in his pronunciation. And this is, so a few pages later, this is how they meet and what they say to each other. "Mi chiamo Shimeta Yetmengeta Attila Profeti." "Cosa?" "Shimeta Yetmengeta Attila Profeti." La testa di Ilaria si piega verso la spalla. Sulla fronte le appaiono 4 rughe orizzontali. "Senti, se vuoi prendermi in giro..." "No, non voglio questo." L'italiano è quasi senza accento, ma le T hanno sonorità cave, quasi di tamburo. Ilaria raccoglie le poche briciole di sopportazione di cui ancora dispone alla fine di questa giornata di schifo. "Ho capito, hai guardato il nome sul citofono. Non capisco solo come ti è venuto di farti tutte ste scale. Dai, adesso vattene." "Mi chiamo Shimeta Yetmengeta Attila Profeti", ripete paziente lui, senza traccia di offesa. "Se Attilio Profeti vecchio è tuo padre, allora tu sei mia zia." Ilaria sgrana gli occhi e d'improvviso sembra molto più giovane della sua età, scoppia a ridere. "Tua zia!" La risata le solleva le spalle magre. "Non ci posso credere, tua zia?" Butta fuori con forza l'aria dal naso, scuote la testa, poi si ricompone, ma sulla faccia le rimane una traccia di sorriso. "Ma lo sai che questa ancora non la conoscevo? Cos'è, una tecnica nuova? E sì che in questo quartiere ne ho viste tante. Vabbè, su, hai vinto." Si mette a frugare nella borsetta e tira fuori il portafogli. "Mi ha fatto ridere e oggi, credimi, non era facile. Tieni", gli allunga una banconota da 5 euro. "Te li sei guadagnati." Il ragazzo non ha mosso un solo muscolo del viso quando lei si è messa a ridere. Né ora alza la mano per prendere la banconota. Invece si fruga in tasca anche lui e ne tira fuori un documento. "Tu non hai capito", le dice porgendoglielo, mentre si alza in piedi. È un po' meno alto di quanto sembrava, ma perfino più magro. "Questo è il mio vero nome." Lei lo prende. È una carta d'identità. La copertina è color verde, oliva. Sotto la scritta Etiopia sono stampigliati anche 6 caratteri aggraziati, tutte curve, tratti obliqui e codine. Ilaria lo apre. Anche qui ogni scritta è in 2 alfabeti. In quello latino c'è scritto Shimeta Yetmengeta Attila Profeti. And this is how this first encounter starts. Sorry, I'm just checking on time.
Yeah, probably just...
Yeah, just about to finish. So the other thing that I wanted to, actually would have liked to explore a bit more is that while I focus on Ilaria's ambivalence in this case, the same ambivalence can actually be found in the character of Scimeta himself. And sorry, there is a bit of a spoiler here, so but it's still a good book and it's worth reading. We find out that Scimeta is not really who he's saying to be, because the real Scimeta had died. And in an act of generosity and concern for this young man's life, the grandmother of Scimeta, who was the woman that Ilaria's father had a relationship with, gave this identity card to his cousin and told him, "This is your ticket to Italy, take it, just pretend to be the person and go." And it's quite interesting because in this last exchange, when they were actually when Scimeta comes clear, and he actually comes clear simply because this Berlusconian sexual partner of Ilaria, she actually calls him as like, "Give me a favor." So she's always believed in following the rules, but then she uses her friendship to like, "Give me a green card for this guy because he's my friend, he's my family," and so she kind of betrays everything that she stands for. And then he finds out, well, that guy is actually dead. So who have I given you this favor for? And then we have at the end of the book we have the story of Scimeta. Now. He says, "Il mio vero nome è Senai Bantiwalu. Scimeta era mio cugino, mia madre è Saba e suo padre erano i figli di Ayata Beba, ma fratelli a metà come voi due. Il padre di Saba era Amara, quello di Mangheta Italiano, il vostro. Quello che vi ho raccontato è tutto vero, solo che io ero lui e lui era me." Ilaria guarda Attilio, and this is Attilio Jr., so her stepbrother, che tace e non dice "te l'avevo detto", because Attilio was always the one, you don't know, you can't possibly believe him. Anche lui adesso vuole solo ascoltare quello che Senai, bisogna abituarsi a questo nuovo nome, ha da dire. But the bit that I'm actually also interested in, so there is this ambivalence in Senai now, not Scimeta anymore, because the way we kind of are linked to think about it is, okay, there are prejudices on the privileged side, this is the white, so we're all concerned about looking at the sense of accountability on the side of the Italians who are we're finally kind of discovering our own story, and we tend to believe Scimeta and just trust him, but then we find out that he's also lying. And then he's explained, Ayat vuol dire nonna, a Beba non ci vedeva più, camminava più storta di un ubriaco, sapeva che stava per morire. Ha dato a Senai il documento di suo cugino, lo teneva lei sotto il letto per non farglielo confiscare. Gli ha detto: "Prendilo tu, a Scimeta ormai non serve, nascondilo in viaggio e usalo solo quando arrivi in Italia." Lui aveva obiettato che c'era la foto, gli italiani avrebbero visto che era diverso, Ayat Beba l'aveva tranquillizzato. I bianchi non la guardano mai la faccia dei neri, solo il colore. E Senai era uscito. Ilaria ripensa al loro incontro sul pianerottolo, and she had his identity card in her hands. È vero, lei ai tratti nella foto sul documento non c'è neanche badato. "Cosa vuol dire il tuo nome?" gli chiede. And here we find out his name means gift. So it's this gift that comes to the Prophetis family in a very kind of intricate and complex way, and that is able to actually recast all these notions of who's the colonizer, who's the colonized, who's the liar, who's the privileged. All these kind of dichotomies are now kind of collapsing onto each other, and what we find is a history of human beings in which finally, in a novel written by an Italian, there is this sense of self-reflection on the Italian fascist past and in the role that Italians have played in this part of history, but there is also a very, very immediate sense that there is no disconnection between this past and the present that we're seeing today in the form of Scimeta traveling to Italy. And I'll stop here and I'll hand it over to Mark.